Why did Cyclops give up teaching? Because he only had one pupil. Welcome to Lassoed Volume 287. It's an all X-Men themed video today. Welcome, I'm glad that you're here. There's some really good stuff. I broke an unofficial rule of mine. I usually don't watch trailers. I don't like the best parts of the project to get spoiled for me in advance. But I did watch the trailer for X-Men 97 Season 2, which is coming next month. And despite Season 1, which I thoroughly enjoyed even though it moved a little bit too fast, and despite the fact that they're using not my favorite X-Men villain for this season, it does look good, and I'm pretty excited for it. I've been collecting X-Men comic book back issues to share with you pretty much since the beginning of the year, and I have half a dozen and a slab to share in today's video that I'm stoked about. There's some upgrades and there's some new things into my collection, and by the time we're done, my collection will get a huge boost in the X-Men category. So, let's get started. It's all about 1 in the first comic book that I'm sharing with you today, X-Men Volume 1, Issue 111. This was published in 1978, and we have the X-Men Creative Dream Team. Dave Cockrum doing the cover, Chris Claremont as the writer, and John Byrne as the interior artist. We can't go any further without acknowledging the fact that Arcade and Banshee look similar enough already, but put Banshee on the cover with a bow tie, and that's Arcade. That's what people are going to think when they're swapping or flipping right past these books. Sorry, Chet, that's just the way it is. But it is a good cover. In the previous issue, 110, which I showed you in Comic Book Editions Volume 272, the team ends up getting captured. As this issue starts out, they are part of a traveling circus, a traveling carnival, but they don't know who they are. They're suffering from amnesia. We get a nice homage back to X-Men number 1, with Slim Summers, which was Cyclops' nickname that was only used in that issue and brought back after all of these years in this issue. There's some controversy with this issue as well, because it appears that Mesmero forces himself upon Miz Destiney. That's what they're calling Jean Grey / Phoenix in this issue. But in classic X-Men issue 17's backup story, they went to clear up that nothing actually happened between the two characters. This is special to me when I picked it up at a comic show earlier this year, because picking this up now means I have X-Men issues 97 through 220 consecutively. And that's a big goal for me to have been able to accomplish. Let's keep going with the fun. X-Men Volume 1, Issue 99. We're going to go back 2 years to 1976. This time Dave Cockrum is doing the cover and interior art. Chris Claremont still remains a writer. This is an upgrade for me. I've had a copy of this for a while, but it was in really low grade, and I had hoped to have the opportunity to upgrade it at some point, which now I have. This story's got a lot going on. So most of the X-Men are in outer space, and they're trying to escape a space station. They end up inside these bubbles, hurtled into space when the Sentinels attack. Wow. There's some coloring errors with the blue and yellow plates being reversed on pages 1, 10, and 11. And you know who has a cameo in this? Geraldo Rivera. Remember him? He had a nose for news before his nose became news. The original X-Men arrive at the end of this issue, and they set up for issue 100 with that fantastic cover for the anniversary issue. So this era of X-Men kind of ties into X-Factor, and I'll be talking X-Factor as the special guest with No Good Comics and John's Comics with Friends on Omni X-Men. If you're watching this video on its original drop date of Tuesday, June 2nd, I'll be a guest on their program this evening, 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. If this time has already passed by the time you're watching this video, it's been archived on the Playlist Collaborations folder in my channel history. So I always look forward to being a part of Omni X-Men, and I'm grateful that Justin and John have invited me back this year. This next book, 1976 as well, Marie Sevrin and Sal Buscema are responsible for the cover. Chris Claremont and Bill Mantlo are the writers, Dave Cockrum doing the interior art. It's X-Men Volume 1, Issue 96. This wasn't one that I had actively sought out, although I had been looking at for a while, because what makes this extra special for me in my collection is I now have X-Men issue 96 through 220 consecutively. Yeah, I like that a lot. So the X-Men essentially in this story are still reeling from the death of Thunderbird. And with Thunderbird gone, this is the first time that Wolverine kind of assumes the Thunderbird outspoken, hot-headed, rebellious role within the team. It's also a key issue as it's the first appearance of Moira MacTaggert, and in this issue she shows up to be the X-Men's housekeeper. How much has changed for Moira since their first appearance in this issue? And I remember these early appearances of Moira. She was really branding the weapons too and the guns, and she knew how to operate those. I was just talking about my appearance. Well, I'll be talking about X Factor on Omni X-Men. I did an X Factor themed back issue of the week, which dropped yesterday morning on my YouTube channel. I'm talking about X Factor Volume 1, Issue 2, which is the first appearance of Tower. If you haven't had the chance to check out that short, I hope you'll do so, and thank you for your support with my back issue of the week. Since we're talking about the original team, let's do a book before the reprints with the OG team. X-Men Volume 1, Issue 66. This is 1970. Marie Sevrin does the cover. Roy Thomas was the writer. Sal Buscema on interior art. As I said last issue before they went into reprints, I had read this digitally because this was a comic book I always wanted based on the cover, and I read the story digitally. I haven't read it since I purchased it, and honestly, I was kind of disappointed in it, but I love this cover so much. And this particular copy has such bright colors on the cover, I just couldn't resist it, even the story isn't as much as I had hoped for. Amazing Adventures Volume 2, Issue 12 reveals that due to the public backlash after this fight in Vegas, the X-Men stopped appearing in public as frequently. Of course, the team was still active, and John Byrne took that idea and ran with it decades later in X-Men The Hidden Years. I purchased the omnibus of X-Men The Hidden Years, which I showed last week in my Lassoed Volume 286 video. I haven't read The Hidden Years storyline or title in, gosh, I don't know, 15 plus years at least. So I'm looking forward to opening that up and digging back into rereading on that. This story has a direct sequel in Savage Hulk Volume 2, Issues 1 through 4. And then inside of this story, it has references to the previous issue of X-Men, issue 65, plus Avengers 68 is referenced in the story as well. Love the cover, even though the interior story wasn't so much my favorite, and I hope someday to get more of these pre-reprint, pre-100 X-Men's into my collection. I'm going to interrupt this X-Men mutant themed Lassoed video to show you a slab. If I'm getting an X-Men slab, you know I'm getting this one. X-Men Volume 1, Issue 130. This is 1979. CGC 8.5 with the John Romita Jr. cover. Chris Claremont and John Byrne are the writers. John Byrne interior art. The second part of the Dark Phoenix Saga, which is my favorite Marvel storyline of all time. First appearance of Dazzler. You know someone had to be a Dazzler fan, and I was elected to the job. And I take my responsibility seriously as a Dazzler fan. I have had for a long time, since I was a childhood collector, a raw copy of this book. And it was in, or is in, very nice shape. But I kept seeing this graded copy at the comic store. And I would look at it all the time. I mean, like all the time I was looking at it. Did it sell? I think I was going to have major FOMO if this thing ended up selling and it wasn't being sold to me. So last month, about a month ago, when the free comic book day was going on and the shop had a sale, I said, this is time to take advantage of that. And that's how I ended up putting this into my collection. I could reread and frequently do reread the Dark Phoenix Saga all the time. 129 was the very first X-Men comic book I ever owned and read, which was the beginning of the Dark Phoenix Saga. Then the second one I ever owned and read was 136. And so much had changed between 129 and 136 that I ended up picking up back issues as a childhood collector, and my love for this story is still as strong as it was back then, as is my love for Dazzler. Okay, now we will resume back into the raw books in this X-Men themed Lassoed Loot 287 video. I was very much on the fence on picking this one up or not. It's X-Men Volume 1, Issue 221. We're all the way up to 1987 right now. Marc Silvestri does the cover and interior. Chris Claremont still remains the writer. It's the first full appearance of Mr. Sinister. I'm not the biggest Apocalypse fan. Definitely not one of my favorite X-Men villains. And I know Mr. Sinister kind of ties into Apocalypse, so I think by default he's okay, but he wasn't my favorite, so I didn't know if I wanted to pay higher prices to have this first full appearance. But what really changed my mind was picking this up now gets me X-Men 96 through 221 consecutively. So I like that fact a lot. Weird Al gave a reference and a shout out to this comic book in his song White and Nerdy. You would think that this would kind of be a favorite era for me of X-Men because Dazzler's part of the team, Havok is part of the team, and I like those characters so much. And I definitely did like the Dazzler parts. My favorite parts was Rogue versus Dazzler in a training exercise. And, because Rogue, when she was evil, tried to kill Dazzler a couple times, and Dazzler still held some resentment towards that. But between what happens in this story and the next issue, Dazzler kind of works through her problems with Rogue. And then I was a little shocked reading this, too, that they end up fighting Polaris. I mean, I remember Polaris as a good gal. So that was a little shocking. I honestly thought that when I picked up this 221, I had this big consecutive run, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm ready to stop. And then I noticed I didn't have 222. But lucky for me, that is not an expensive book at all. So the very next day, I picked up 222 to have this. 1987 still, also Marc Silvestri, cover and interior art. Chris Claremont remains the writer. This means I have X-Men 96 through 225 consecutively. I really don't want to go further in the 200s, but I wouldn't mind going earlier than 96, Get 95, the Death of Thunderbird, get 94, and a GSX-1, which might be impossible, but it still doesn't hurt to dream, does it? I would rather go earlier than later with my X-Men collecting and consecutive runs. Page 3 finds someone in the beach reading a comic book called Wildcats. And a lot of fans like to think that that's foreshadowing of a Wildcat series in the 90s. I think that that's just a little bit of coincidence there. I don't read into that a whole lot. So as for Polaris being evil, I find out that she's possessed by malice. I certainly wouldn't mind owning X-Men 50 with that beautiful Polaris cover in green and a little bit of yellow. I know that's not her first appearance, 49 is. I do have 49 in my collection, but 50 has such an awesome cover. It's pretty expensive, so I don't know if that's going to end up in the collection, but it wouldn't hurt my feelings if someday it did. So there you have 6 raw and 1 graded X-Men comic book that I've recently added into my collection. What do you think? Which one's your favorite? What consecutive run of X-Men comic books do you have? Let's talk about that in the comments section below. Your comments are welcomed, encouraged, and appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and make sure to give the video a thumbs up, a like, a heart, because the algorithm appreciates that very much. DC Comics fans, Signature King Tony and Silver Hair Bronze Age Babe and I have the greatest DC Comics show on YouTube coming up Sunday night. We're going to talk about Action Comics, some Superman, a little bit of Supergirl. 8:15 p.m. Eastern, 7:15 p.m. Central here on my YouTube channel. I hope you have the opportunity to join me. I certainly would appreciate it. That wraps up my Lassoed Loot 287 video where I'm catching more comic book treasures. Thanks for making it to the end of today's video and stay excellent. Bye for now.